Hi there, and a very welcome to the QJamTracks channel for the second part of this crystal clear guitar tutorial. Well, in part 1 of this tutorial we have seen how to improve your time feel in general and the ability to count more complex rhythm figures. Now in this part we take things one step further and look how to deal with even more complex rhythm figures that you will find throughout the vast musical spectrum. In this part of the tutorial we're going to look at the syncopated rhythm figures that are common to all kinds of popular styles. And also the triplet and her family gets our undivided attention because it's such a heavily used rhythmic entity in blues, jazz, rock solos and rock songs. Think of the shuffle rhythm, for instance. Well, after this I tell you about the special rhythm figure that arises when different types are combined. Anyway, lots to discuss. So let's get on with it. Now when we learned music, we all started with quarter notes, also known as quavers. And right after that we got used to the eighth notes, also known as semiquavers. All the notes in these beginner exercises were placed solid on the beat, and so were the accents. Like in this simple children's song. It's simple and yet a bit boring maybe at the same time. And that's because there's not much going on in the rhythm of this song. So a variation in rhythm is a welcome guest to get a more interesting melody. One of the means to establish this is the use of a so-called syncopation, where we place accents on notes where they normally wouldn't occur. Now take a look at this short progression, which is played on the beat. The accents lie on the strong first and third beat of the measure. Now let's shift the accents to the weaker beat of the measure, beat 2 and beat 4. Now immediately we feel that it has more movement and it sounds more interesting. That's because the accents lie on notes that we wouldn't expect. It's now a truly syncopated rhythm. And there are many rhythm figures on which you can project the syncopation. In fact, it's so much used that for our ears it almost sounds more logical than non-syncopated rhythms. Now, what would you prefer? The first one without syncopation or the second one with syncopation? I think the answer is obvious, right? In the next part of this video I'll show you how to deal with these often complex rhythm figures. Now we can create a syncopated rhythm in 4 ways. Shifting the accent by playing notes off the beat. Shifting the accent by placing rests on the beat. Shifting the accent by tying notes from a weak to a strong beat. And shifting accents by the use of dynamics. And we will explore all 4 ways to create syncopation. Now let's start with playing off the beat. Say we have this melody where all the notes are on the beat. So there's no syncopation whatsoever. Now let's shift the accents by playing the first note on the beat and the rest of the notes in the measure before the beat, like this. Now see how we have shifted the accents by making the first note an eighth note instead of a quarter note. Now let's hear how this compares to the melody we have just heard. Quite a difference, right? Now the melody has much more movement and it's more inspiring. Now in part 1 you learned that counting was extremely useful to improve your rhythmic abilities. Also with syncopation it's important that you count. In this example you would count like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Another way to create a syncopated progression or melody is to place the rests on the beat. Let's take the same melody we've just used. Now let's shift the notes by placing rests on the second, third and fourth beat. Again, we have created a more interesting version of the melody by the use of rests, resulting in a syncopated rhythm. Now, as you can see, almost any riff, strum pattern or melody can be converted to a syncopated alternative. A famous example of using rest to create a successful syncopation rhythm is the song Grange by ZZ Top. Now, sometimes the created syncopated rhythm notation is hard to read, like in the example we saw earlier. Now we can easily improve the readability in tablature and standard notation by using ties between notes. Now, a tie glues two notes together as being one note with the cumulative length of the tied notes. The advantage is that we now can see which notes are on the beat and which notes fall in between. And in this example, 2 8 notes of a half beat are tied together to become a quarter note of one beat. In our example, the readability leaves much to be desired. It's a good idea to change the notation with tied notes like this. Now, it's exactly the same melody, but the notation is much easier to read. Now, even without changing the melody or adding rests or ties, we can create a syncopation within a non-syncopated rhythm. Now we will do this by playing accents off the beat. Take a look at this example. The accents in this simple riff lie on the beat, and also the strumming and bass line are pointed at playing on the beat, so no syncopation at all. Now let's change the accents. In the next example, we take the same riff, but now we put accents on the first beat, the second half of the second beat, and the fourth beat. We create a 3-3-2 accented rhythm figure in a 4-4 beat, which is a common rhythm in many genres. Now the rhythm is syncopated. So you see, even a straight on the beat rhythm figure can be transformed to a syncopated rhythm. Now often you hear this 3-3-2 rhythm in hard rock riffs and alternative pop songs, something like in A Forest by The Cure, for instance. Pop and rock, there are some frequently used syncopated rhythm figures or combinations of these figures that work very well. Now let's take a look at some of these juicy rhythmic patterns, so you can see how to count them and understand its structure. Now we start with the ultimate singer-songwriter's pattern. Now the most used syncopated rhythmic pattern, and maybe mother of all pop song patterns, looks like this. It's in a 4-4 beat, where the second and the third beat are tied to create a syncopation. The strum on the third beat will be absent in this pattern, at least more or less. Although there is not really a strum on the third beat, you should make a downstroke strumming movement on this third beat. It's just that you don't hit the strings, and in this way your arm keeps moving in the regular half beats, and this helps you to keep the pulse. Now you count this pattern like this. 1, 2 and 3 and 4. 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 1. Now this is a typical singer-songwriter's pattern and can be strummed or fingerpicked, and both ways work very well. 1, 2 and 4. 1, 2 and 4. 1, 2 and 4. 1, 2 and 4. pattern that you can't miss it even if you try. Now, Travis picking is one of those syncopated rhythms that is used all over the world and has many applications. Although Travis picking pattern itself isn't a syncopated pattern, it does sound like one if you play it the right way. Now, the essence of Travis picking is a bass line straight on the beat, with a syncopated melody of chord notes on top of that bass line. Now, this is a typical Travis picking variation, and when we play it like this, like it's notated, it sounds like this. And as you can see, it has no syncopation in the notation, but the higher notes on the third and the second string are accentuated. And these notes are off the beat and thus create a syncopation in the rhythm. It's subtle but noticeable. Now it sounds like this. Now, Travis picking has lots of variations, so keep an eye for the structure of Travis picking and you'll recognize it. One of the most famous examples using a straightforward Travis picking pattern is the song Dust in the Wind by Kansas, which is forbidden to play in music stores, as we all know. Now, strum patterns with 16th notes are a bit more difficult than patterns with only quarter notes and 8th notes. If you're not familiar with counting rhythm figures with 16th notes, please watch part 1 of this tutorial first. Now, the most important thing to do when playing patterns with 16 notes is to keep your strumming movement on the 16th note. So your arm or wrist keeps moving in 16ths, so down, up stroke per beat. Now, this pulsating movement in 16th notes improves your inner pulse and keeps the strumming logical and fluent, like this. Now, one of the most used syncopated strumming patterns with 16 notes is this one. You can count like this. 1 and 2 and the 3 and 4 and the 1 and 2 and the 3 and 4. When applied to a progression, it sounds like this. Next, we're going to look at rhythms starting before the beat. Now, to create movement and tension in the riff instantly, you can just start before the first beat. So, on the second half of the fourth beat in a 4/4 time signature. This is also very common and works like a charm. Now, here's a simple one-note example. Example of playing the first note before the beat is Enter Sandman by Metallica, which was written by Metallica's lead guitarist Kirk Hammett after he was inspired by Soundgarden's Louder Than Love album. Just by playing the low E string just before the beat creates that continuous drive that this riff is known for. Another good example is a straight rock and roll based riff with a little bite, like this. It's also used very effectively in Michael Jackson's iconic song Beat It, where Steve Lukather plays a syncopated riff starting just before the beat. A notorious anecdote goes around that guitar virtuoso Eddie Van Halen recorded the awesome solo in this song, which became a benchmark for many guitarists, by the way. In return, Eddie Van Halen just asked for some beers, not knowing that the song would be a #1 hit all over the world. The After Beat is very common to reggae, which originated in Jamaica in the late 60s. Bob Marley was one of the most influencing reggae artists in the 70s and 80s. Now, instead of playing before the beat, anticipating the rhythm, we now play the chord after the beat, so on the second half of the beat. And this creates a relaxed sound and creates a specific syncopated rhythm figure. It's often played with muted chords on the beat. And you count like this. Now here's an example of an afterbeat riff. Listen to Three Little Birds by Bob Marley for a famous example of an afterbeat rhythm. Now if you speed up the afterbeat rhythm, then it becomes ska, which could be seen as a European subgenre of the afterbeat rhythm. Think for instance of bands like Madness. Now the Hemiola in the rhythm refers to a 3/2 rhythmic construction. We play 3 accents where normally 2 accents are played. The most obvious examples are played in the 6/8 time signature, which has a 2-part rhythmic structure. 2 times a group of 3 8 notes, and the accent lies on the 1st and the 4th beat. Now an Hemiola in a 6/8 time signature would consist of 3 groups of 2 8 notes. So this creates a 3/2 rhythm figure, like this. 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. Bernstein used this structure in his famous West Side Story in the song I Want to Be in America. 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. A triplet and a sextuplet occupy a special place in music, and they are widely used especially in jazz and blues. They belong to the so-called tuplet family. A triplet is also a 3/2 rhythm, just like the Hemiola, but now over 1 beat. 1 beat is now divided into 3 equal parts. Here the quarter note is divided into 3 8 notes. It's notated as 3 8 notes indicated by a number 3. And we count the triplet like this. 1 and the 2, 3 and the 4, 1 and the 2, 3 and the 4. Here's an example of a straightforward melody using 8-note triplets. And we can also divide 1 beat into 6 equal parts, making it a sextuplet. We notate this in the form of 6/16 notes with the indication of the number 6. Sometimes we also see a notation of 6/4, and that's actually quite logical. 1 beat has 4 16th notes. We play 6 16th notes in the time of those 4 16ths, so 6/4. So when we count sextuplets, we have a number of options. Let me demonstrate a few. 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 1 and the 2 and the 1 and the 2 and the 1. So here's an improvisation with sextuplets. Now the last thing that I would like to tell you about is the shuffle rhythm, which has everything to do with a triplet. In the shuffle feel rhythm, that is common to blues and jazz, 2 straight 8 notes are interpreted as a triplet. The first 8 note has a length of 2 parts of the triplet, and the second eighth note has a length of one part of the triplet. So we count like this. 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4 and the 1 and the 2 and the 3, 4. We also call this kind of rhythm jazz eighths, in contrast to straight eighths. We find this shuffle rhythm in all kinds of music, and initially this shuffle rhythm is hard to nail if you're not familiar with it. In fact, in my time at the conservatory in the Netherlands in classical guitar classes, some of my fellow students couldn't grasp the shuffle rhythm simply because they never encountered it in classical music. So we notate the rhythm in 2 eighth notes, but it should be played in a shuffle feel with this marking. Let's look at the common rock and roll riff with straight eighths and transform this to a laid-back shuffle feel to point it towards blues and jazz. Now, this is the original riff with no shuffle feel. And here it's again, but now in a shuffle feel rhythm. Here's another example of a Stevie Ray Vaughan style riff. The 80s metal song The Four Horsemen, which appeared on Metallica's debut album Kill 'Em All, is a good example of a faster and heavier application of the shuffle rhythm. The song was written by the later fired Dave Mustaine, who released the song under the name Mechanics, while playing in the band Megadeth. Both songs, The Four Horsemen and Mechanics, are very similar but have completely different lyrics. Now, if you watch part 1 and you have finished watching this video, you know enough of the essence of rhythmic patterns. And you are more than enough familiar with common rhythmic figures and some special rhythmic constructions. Although you understand rhythmic figures and you know how to count them, it will only come to you for a full 100% by practicing different rhythms over and over again. It's something that you will develop over time. And therefore it's a good idea to listen to songs and try to copy the rhythm that is played by either the guitar or any other instrument for that matter. Just experiment with different combinations of rhythmic figures and make it your own, and practice weekly or even daily if you can spare the time and devotion. Well, I hope this was crystal clear for you and it will bring you one step closer to immortality and absolute heroism. I say greets from the Netherlands. Bye.